Good morning and welcome to Veterans Heartbeat on the Pulse of the Veteran, where we discuss issues of health, happiness, opportunity, and well-being of interest to the veteran community, their families, and the community who honors them.
Good morning and welcome to another episode of Veterans Heartbeat, brought to you by River, the Rural Institute for Veterans Education and Research. My name is Jason Zencraft. My co-host Ed Lisofsky is here with me, and he is the Executive Director of River. We welcome you to a weekly wide-ranging discussion of issues, events, opportunities, and needs in our veteran community. Morning, Ed. How you doing?
Morning, Jason.
We'd also like to thank our sponsor, Farside Signs. They create amazing-looking vehicle graphics that will drive traffic to your business. They are located at 1526 South Avenue West in Missoula. Follow them on the web, Instagram, and Facebook, or just stop on by.
So this morning we're talking to Dr. Ibsen. We talked a lot about the chronic pain and the problems that it causes. And we also have Kristen Stratford in the studio.
Good morning.
And we have Connor.
Good morning.
So we want to talk a little bit about treatment on the chronic pain. A lot of different things that we can do, and we're exploring in the Institute. Last week we had Dr. Ibsen on, and he was talking about, the causes of pain and whatnot. This week we brought him back on because there was a lot of requests. What do you do with chronic pain? And I know there's a big issue with the opiate epidemic causing people to have issues of even loss of life. Mark, how you doing this morning?
How am I doing? I'm doing great. So here's the thing about chronic pain. Chronic pain is defined as pain that persists longer than 3 months or longer than an expected injury would cause pain. So chronic pain sets up a pattern in our brain of interpretation of the pain signal. Now, when we treat acute pain, you're treating a collarbone fracture or a rib injury or appendectomy or that sort of thing, and people don't really need pain medicines for very long after the most routine of issues. The thing about chronic pain is that this is pain that's persisting despite all our efforts to interfere with the pain trigger. So a lot of sources of chronic pain are there are some injuries and illnesses that happen to people, and they're left with chronic pain afterwards. Characteristically would be a diabetic that gets peripheral neuropathy, or a patient who gets a lymphoma and they get chemotherapy and that causes nerve pain afterwards, or someone has a brain injury and has headaches. There's no way to do a surgical procedure to fix that. So there are 100 million people in pain in America, according to a research study from 2011 by the Institute of Medicine, and about 20 or 30 million of those patients are on chronic pain medications. So it's a big problem in the United States. The deaths that are happening are less from prescribed medications than they are from either counterfeit or imported or stolen meds. And, of course, the thing that's really killing people is heroin that's contaminated by illicit fentanyl from China. So we have conflated the issue of chronic pain and addiction. There's about 2.5 million addicts in America and 100 million people in chronic pain. Both are serious illnesses that require a different approach. Some people have both, but that's like saying some people both have high blood pressure and diabetes. You treat both illnesses in the same person. So I hope that answered your question about what I think chronic pain is about.
Well, you brought up fentanyl. That's an interesting drug. It is not an opiate base, is it?
Fentanyl is an opiate base. It's a synthetic opiate, so it's really an opioid. So it's not from the poppy or opium. It's manufactured from scratch, and the recipe for it is fairly basic, and sort of like how they manufacture meth, you can manufacture fentanyl in a lab, and that's essentially what's happening in China. They're manufacturing different forms of fentanyl that can't be detected, and there's this one kind of elephant tranquilizer called carfentanil, which is highly, highly toxic because actually they use it to take an elephant down. So if a human being takes it, they tend to stop breathing and die.
Wow. So let's talk
about... But fentanyl itself, prescribed fentanyl, legitimately prescribed fentanyl, is a very excellent pain reliever. And unfortunately, it's getting a bad name because of the illicit fentanyl. But people need to take pain relievers when they're in pain, and we have lost sight of that now. We're having a terrible kind of a witch hunt in our country about everybody overreacting to the idea that people are dying from opiates. And the problem with that is the data that's obtained about opiate deaths is not very reliable data. So we can't sort out when somebody dies of an opiate overdose, whether it was stolen or counterfeit or grandma's pills or from a doctor's prescription pad. In fact, one researcher, Josh Bloom with the American Council on Health and Science, did a research study where he actually estimated that only about 5,000 people a year are dying of taking a prescription pill. Now, that's 5,000 more than we'd like, but if you put that in the context that, similar to ibuprofen, about 16,000 people a year die of ibuprofen problems such as kidney problems or GI bleeding. So out of 350 million people, that tends to be a small number. So even though if it happens to your loved one, it's a huge impact in your family. People die from insulin. We don't stop treating diabetics because insulin can be toxic. People, fire would be another thing. Fire heats our homes and it can burn us to death. Either way, it's an energetic thing, and fire can either harm us or we can harness it for our benefit. Water can either quench our thirst or it can drown us. So this is not an unusual phenomenon in human existence. Okay, so
not all the press that we hear about the opiates is true. I think President Trump calls it fake news. Would you agree with that?
I would. And there's some distortion of the statistics going on. And the key thing when statistics are being distorted is to find out who's benefiting from the distortion.
So who benefits?
Well, I'm going to be really frank here about this. It is easier to go after doctors than it is to find drug dealers. In order to go after a doctor, you need to sit behind a desk, look at a computer, and find out who's prescribing the most medicine, and then take that doctor down. They know where we live, and they know that we keep good records, and it's become open season on doctors. It turns out that the people to be concerned about are the illicit drug dealers, people who are manufacturing counterfeit pills, people who are importing them, that sort of thing. So, as usual, the only way to find out about or intervene in the drug trade is to do undercover work. And there's less of that going on and more of this idea that, well, doctors are prescribing so many pain pills, that must be causing all these heroin overdose deaths. And I've done some research, and I'm finding out what's causing all these heroin deaths. Heroin. Now, I don't prescribe heroin, and thinking that Percocet leads to heroin is just as bogus as any other idea that using breast milk might lead to a heroin overdose. I mean, it's really a ridiculous assertion. And what's hiding is the fact that poppies are being grown in record-setting numbers in Afghanistan under the guidance of and protection of our troops. Nobody wants to talk about that.
So there's a lot of issues around the opiates. So a lot of physicians after Dr. Christensen became convicted will not even prescribe an opiate. Is that true?
That's true. That's true for me, too. When Dr. Christensen was arrested, I stopped treating pain medication patients. And then one of my patients died because he didn't have any access. He killed himself. So I resumed treating a few of the sickest patients. And now that Dr. Christensen was convicted, basically my theory is the standard of care for pain management has been established by a jury of 12 in Ravalli County and assisted by the county attorneys there. And so until someone in the medical field or in law enforcement or in government regulation says that it is safe to prescribe the appropriate prescription for the appropriate patient at the appropriate time, there's no way anyone in this state is going to be willing to give any opiate to anybody.
Okay, I'm thinking through that. That is just mind-boggling.
It really is.
So what you're telling me, and I've got a lot of listeners that are elderly out there, and, they can get into some pain, but the standard of care has been decided by the jury and not by a group of doctors. That's
correct.
Okay. So opiates are pretty much out for pain management.
Even though they're quite safe, they are out.
You were in the Institute this week. You got a tour.
Yeah. Great place you got there.
Tell me about what you saw with what we're doing with the pain management that we do.
Well, I think everybody who is interested in eliminating opiates for pain are interested in finding other alternative ways of treating pain. The problem with that up till now is that those other ways have not been paid for. You guys are doing great work there in terms of exploring different modalities that are available that would help people who are having chronic pain but not subject them to the risk of an opiate. So, for example, dry needling, acupuncture, electrical stimulation devices, TENS units, e-stim devices. I noticed that you had an awesome massage chair there. And so there are a lot of ways to treat pain, and opiates are only reserved for people who fail all of the other options. One of the things I saw today is this idea from a Dr. Ballantyne in Washington State that people need to learn pain acceptance. That's like saying people need to learn hunger acceptance in Africa. People come to the doctor because they've already tried moderate pain relief with Tylenol or ibuprofen or massage or ice packs or other things, and now they're not successful with their own modalities for treating pain. They come to the doctor because they want to know what pain signal it is and if they've got something that's threatening to them. And then they also come to the doctor because they expect that we have the expertise and the willingness to help relieve their pain. And unfortunately, these days, that's been limited.
Well, how hard is it? I mean, okay, pain, it's a word we've all heard, but how do we describe it? I mean, the scale, the pain scale, 1 to 10, the guy that developed that said it was the worst thing he ever did in his life because now it's the reason why a lot of people are getting a lot of prescriptions for pain meds.
Well, you cannot make pain an objective finding. In other words, there's nothing available yet to measure pain. PET scans are probably the best, but a PET scan is a several $1,000 procedure that's not covered. So there is no way to actually measure pain. You can measure blood pressure, you can measure vital signs, and that can sometimes tell you that someone's in pain. Their blood pressure will be high, their pulse will be up, but that's more for acute pain. Those physiologic responses to chronic pain tend to diminish with time. And someone in chronic pain could be looking at you, not writhing, and tell you that they have a pain at 9 or 10 out of 10. And they're not lying. But pain is a subjective thing, just like hunger. I'm hungry. Well, you don't look hungry. Well, I don't look hungry. I'm 30 pounds overweight. But I might get hungry, and, I don't have to beg for food at the restaurant. I just order the food, and they bring it to me. It's up to me to modify my caloric intake so I'm not so fat. But I still have hunger. But I don't have to prove that I'm hungry. It's assumed that hunger happens in human beings because we have to have food in order to generate calories and generate energy. I tend to have a tendency to overeat, and that's my problem. It's not left up to the restaurant person to say, oh, you don't get as big a serving because you're fat. That's kind of the parallel that's happening with people in pain. People are saying, well, I can't see your pain. I'm not going to believe that you're in that kind of pain, or I'm going to be suspicious that perhaps you might be selling your pain pills, so I don't want to give you any. That is problematic. That's like turning the doctor into a police officer. And we cannot police our patients and also care for them.
Now, some of the big pharmacies got in trouble a while back. Is that correct?
They got fined a while back, yes.
And that was after that they these pharmacies are policing doctors. Is that correct?
That's correct. Because the pharmacists themselves are afraid of recriminations from the Drug Enforcement Agency. In other words, if a pharmacist loses his license or their pharmacy gets shut down because they've prescribed some suspicious medications, that's not good. However, most of that is based on fear. A pharmacist's job is to make sure they have a corresponding responsibility to make sure that every prescription is given for a legitimate purpose. However, now the eyeball rolling and the eyebrow raising that happens is more like, how can a pharmacist determine that a patient isn't selling their pills? They can't do it any better than a doctor can. The only person who can prove that a patient is selling the pills is someone that buys pills from a patient. However, the DEA is now asking pharmacists to look in their crystal ball and say, oh, this patient maybe shouldn't be getting these medicines. That's never been the case in medicine before. A pharmacist wouldn't give a patient amoxicillin if they're allergic to it. They'd give me a call and say, oh, you need to change to erythromycin. I'd say, fine, we'll do that. Now pharmacists and doctors are at odds with each other because the pharmacist has become the essential gatekeeper to who gets what medication. And insurance companies are a gatekeeper also.
So out of the thousands of listeners that we have on this show, we've got somebody in chronic pain. They've been turned off from the opiates. What are they going to do? What's their options here?
Well, you asked me not to mention the number one option I think people can do, but I think at this point that if people are still on an opiate medication and their doctor is cutting them off, they're in a situation where they've got to have a conversation with that doctor and say, look, I don't function without these. I need these medications. There are certain people who metabolize opiates rapidly. We talked about that last week. Certain people that need higher doses than average. And people who've been abandoned by their doctor, they're going to need to take some other thing to relieve their pain. Now, like 80% of my patients that have come off opiates, used herbal therapies to do that. Another 20% have been stuck on the opiates. And frankly, we have a political issue or a fake news issue about this because so many patients are being abandoned. Some of these patients are killing themselves.
So again, what other treatments are available?
Acupuncture, physical therapy, chiropractic, massage, craniosacral therapy, herbal therapies, electrical stimulation therapies, procedures that are done at pain clinics. Since pain clinics don't prescribe opiates anymore, it's hard to call them pain clinics. They used to call pill mills where people could just get pills. Sometimes the pain clinics are now drill mills. They only do procedures. And in fact, there's a move afoot to diminish opiates so that people can get more procedures done. But some of those procedures actually do help people. Some people get harmed from the procedures. So meditation, transformation of our response to pain. Like I said, Dr. Ballantyne in Washington State thinks people should be trained in pain acceptance. I don't think, I've had pain myself. I don't think that it's appropriate to say to people, you've got pain and you're stuck with it. We're not going to treat it. We're just going to not care about whether or not you're comfortable. And believe me, I know you agree with this, Ed, pain's a terrorist, and it sucks the life out of people. In the same way that mental illness makes people poor, so does pain. People get into chronic pain, they can't work anymore, they lose their job, they lose their insurance, and they fall down the scale of Maslow's hierarchy of well-being. And people cannot go to work, then they cannot make any money and support their family, then they go on disability, which is poverty living. So, I'm not saying we should give up on opiates. I'm saying we should advocate that opiates be used in an appropriate way for patients who really need them to function. And functionality is the key thing. All of the good pain clinics that I know of make sure that patients are responding to their therapy by functioning better. And that's what we really want. We don't want to coddle people and expect them to have zero pain. We want them to have pain that's low enough that they can get out of bed, go to work, contribute to their families, or if they're disabled, play with their grandchildren.
Now, many of the veterans that we have dealt with in the clinics that we run, it's hard for them to even describe the pain. Is that very common?
That is common, yes. Yeah.
So back pain is a big one for veterans. Knee pain is another. How would physical therapy help that?
Well, a course of physical therapy is like a given. I mean, if somebody has an injury and they do a recovery process through physical therapy or some other type of body work and they get better, that's great. If they don't, that model does no longer apply to them. So physical therapy is really for recovering from acute injuries. Someone has a chronic injury, they're very rarely benefited by physical therapy. Sometimes they're benefited by occupational therapy, though. Occupational therapy is really training people how to get their activities of daily living accomplished so that they can take care of themselves, shower, make a meal, that sort of thing. So sometimes we shift from physical therapy to occupational therapy. And sometimes patients have to do completely alternative things like, there's this herb from Malaysia called kratom, Kratom. Some people are taking that. I know some people that have been cut off their opiates that are taking a poppy seed tea. They found the result on the internet. That's not stuff I'm familiar with, but it's stuff that my patients tell me about. And then quite a few patients are dipping into other alternatives in order to get their pain relieved. And it's like anybody who's got pain has the right to try to seek relief.
Okay. You've delved in a little bit to ketamine. Is that correct?
Yes, I've read about it. I've had lots of patients ask me to do that for them. And before my urgent care clinic closed 2 years ago, there was some demand for that, and I was considering doing it, but then the clinic closed. So I think ketamine, I'm reading lots of things that are quite positive about its effect. Dr. Tennant in California sees ketamine as an ally in terms of its effect on brain glial cells. Glial cells are the white blood cells of the brain. They monitor inflammation. And if you can decrease inflammation in the brain, you can decrease the amount of pain people are perceiving. So it's very effective in that way, according to some of the articles I've seen. I haven't had any direct experience with it, but given that opiates have gone away and given that so many people are suffering, I think it's worth a try.
We've been talking to you. I think it's something that we're looking at bringing into the Institute. Is that correct? I'd
be happy to research it further and come up with a protocol and see if we can't help people. And people need help. I mean, there's 100 million people in pain, and we've got to do what we can. And if it's too hostile a regulatory environment to prescribe opiates, then I certainly don't think that gabapentin and Lyrica and other toxic medications are the answers. Some people really get bad side effects from that. So we got to find something else that's safe for people to use that maybe can have a profound effect on their pain.
What would your recommendation be to the veteran that's listening to this or the family member that sees them writhing in pain all the time and they're not getting any help? Well,
unfortunately, it's challenging for somebody in that kind of level of pain to protest or go in a march, like we have Race for the Cure. If all the pain patients had a thing like that, it would have to be Limp for the Cure. So it's very difficult for pain patients to advocate for themselves. But if they have family members that are really into it, then letters to their representatives, letters to the law enforcement people, letters to the governor. We have a very restrictive environment now for prescribing anything for pain for people who've been on it for years. I think we need to have a nationwide cultural conversation about how we're going to treat pain in America. There are plenty of research papers done about it that are being ignored. So I think people have got to get politically active. Unfortunately, they're not listening to me anymore. I've been talking about this for about 5 years, making very little progress. So some of these pain patients or family members have got to get up and talk to the governor and say, my loved one is in agony and they need help. And a jury in Ravalli County decided that no one can get opiates. We don't know what we can do. Can you help us? then maybe the legislature can take on creating a pain patient bill of rights that gives people something that they can fall back on if somebody doesn't want to give them their pain medicines or if somebody abandons them suddenly, and see if they can actually give some support to doctors who want to treat pain patients and to the pain patients themselves. I mean, arresting doctors for prescribing opiates is sort of like arresting a car dealer for selling a car to someone who might crash it. I mean, we can't see the future. We don't have a crystal ball, and we certainly can't follow our patients around to see if they're using the medications appropriately. We've got to create some structures that make it safer for patients, but we've got to make some structures that make it safer for doctors as well.
You're right on that one, Mark. Well, it's been a really good morning. I appreciate you coming on with us this morning, Dr. Ibsen.
You're very welcome. I really admire what you're doing, Ed. I mean, you're really helping people as best you can with what you have in front of you, and that's all we can do. And the other thing we can do with our patients, particularly our veterans, who are feeling vulnerable, betrayed, and abandoned, we can love them. We can listen to their story. We can acknowledge their difficulties, and we can support them as best we can in inventing something that's going to work and help them re-enter our society and become the contribution that they've all designed to be.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibsen.
Thanks, Ed.
So for you folks out there that have been looking at the flags, we will be doing a ceremony taking the flags down and presenting flags to some family members on Thursday at 1 o'clock. And we invite you to come out on the corner of Broadway and Mullen for that event. Thank you.
So thank you very much for listening to Veterans Heartbeat. We'd not be able to bring it to you without all the support of the listeners. And thank you again to Farside Signs for sponsoring the show. If you do need a unique vehicle design, swing on by and check them out. Also, thank you to our main sponsor, River. River has an array of services such as veterans-focused education, a vestibular disorder clinic, and now non-pharmaceutical treatments for pain, anxiety, and depression. Check them out on Facebook or on the web at riverofchange.org. Lastly, we'd like to show our appreciation to all of our veterans. Thank you for serving our country and keeping it safe.